Welcome to the deep dive. So today, we're really going deep, not just, skimming the surface.
Mm.
We're plunging right into the concrete architecture, you could say, of a really major text from the 20th century, B.F. Skinner's 1971 book, Beyond Freedom and Dignity, BFD.
Yeah, and it's definitely one that stirs things up. Hugely influential, but also incredibly controversial.
Exactly. And our mission here, it's pretty focused. We want to trace how behaviorism shifted, how it went from maybe the smiling fictional utopia in Walden 2
Right, the earlier one.
to this really stark, cold doctrine in BFD where, he just comes out and says freedom and dignity are obsolete.
He really does. And the sources we're looking at argue this wasn't just academic. They say it became a kind of blueprint.
A blueprint for what, though?
For modern systems of control, often disguised as care or therapy or management.
Okay, so this isn't just history for history's sake.
No. It's like an excavation. We're digging into the moral infrastructure, the ideas underneath a lot of behavioral programs and policies we still see debated today.
We need to understand what Skinner actually built to get why there's so much pushback now against its legacy.
Exactly.
So the big question, the one driving this whole deep dive is, what actually happens when a scientist, a prominent one, declares human freedom is just an illusion? And the world, or maybe, the people running things, the managers, they sort of nod along and agree.
Yeah. It's a heavy question. So where do we start? With BFD itself.
Let's do that. BFD itself. The sources call it Skinner's final sermon, like from the pulpit of control.
That's a good way to put it. If Walden 2 is the gentle suggestion, BFD is the declaration. The mask is off. It's not fiction anymore.
He really cuts to the chase, doesn't he? Arguing freedom is just a myth, like a superstition we cling to.
And dignity, too. The idea that we deserve credit for doing good things. He saw that as just, sentimental baggage.
But why? Why was he so convinced that this old way of talking about morality was holding us back?
Because fundamentally, he believed it was wrong, factually incorrect. Skinner's core idea, it's pretty simple. All behavior is caused.
Caused by external stuff.
Yes, by the environment. Inputs, consequences, rewards, punishments, contingencies, he called them. So for him, real progress wasn't about changing minds or hearts. It was about scientifically engineering the environment.
So salvation, in his view, isn't about conscience or making a choice.
Not at all. It's about getting the environmental controls perfect, designing the system so people do the right thing.
Okay, so he's aiming for a society where maybe morality becomes kind of unnecessary because behavior is just designed, engineered to be good.
Pretty much. It's a
Yeah.
radical idea. And as you can imagine, the reaction back then was intense.
Volcanic is the word that comes up.
Yeah, the sources talk about real professional chaos.
Yeah.
Colleagues writing in 72 about feeling moral vertigo.
Moral vertigo, wow.
They felt he hadn't just, refined science. They felt he'd smuggled in a whole new philosophy, a metaphysics, dressed up as management theory.
There's that one quote that really stands out.
Oh, the human zoo.
Yeah.
Calling his vision a human zoo administered by caretakers who have forgotten they are inside the cage. Powerful stuff.
And that brings us straight to Noam Chomsky. His critique is probably the most famous one. He wasn't just disagreeing with the result.
It was deeper. He went after the whole framework, the language Skinner used. Chomsky called it scientific authoritarianism.
Scientific authoritarianism? What did he mean by that?
He argued Skinner wasn't really being empirical, not just observing. He was acting like a cleric of determinism.
A cleric, like a priest of inevitability.
Kind of. Chomsky's point was that Skinner confused having the ability to predict or control behavior with having the moral right to rule over it.
Okay, I see. And he felt the argument was circular.
Exactly. Skinner's system basically said, we can control behavior because behavior is, by definition, controlled. It's a closed loop. It defines away any possibility of something else.
So if Skinner was trying to engineer a better humanity, what was the bug he was trying to fix? Sources suggest it wasn't obvious things like cruelty or chaos.
Right. It seems like he was trying to cure something much more fundamental.
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty itself.
Yeah, Skinner seemed fundamentally opposed to the unpredictable pulse of life, contradiction, spontaneity, meaning that you couldn't easily measure or pin down.
So unpredictability wasn't a feature of being human for him.
He was a defect, a bug in the system that needed to be engineered out. He seemed to mistake control for care and maybe silence for understanding.
And if you manage to engineer out that unpredictability, you also eliminate something absolutely central to the book's title, responsibility.
Precisely. That's the logical endpoint. If behavior is entirely caused by external factors, then personal responsibility just vanishes. It becomes obsolete.
So his ideal society isn't one of virtuous choices. No, it's pure engineering. Inputs, contingencies, rewards. The perfect environment is one where choice itself becomes, well, unnecessary. You don't choose the right path. The environment just guides you there, gently but firmly.
I've seen this described as a kind of theology stripped of grace.
That's a really insightful way to put it. And the sources suggest the timing was, well, perfect for this message.
How so?
The post-war, Cold War culture. One source said it was drunk on technocracy. There was this huge craving for stability, certainty, predictability.
And Skinner provided a way to feel scientific about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He offered what felt like a scientific justification for compliance, for obedience, which society was kind of demanding anyway. In his system, the sin wasn't cruelty, it was unpredictability. And the virtue, compliance without even needing to be aware of it.
Okay, so that's the theory. How did it jump from the page into the real world? We have to talk about its application, especially clinically. Let's define applied behavior analysis, ABA. It comes up constantly as the direct descendant.
Right. ABA, broadly speaking, is the practice of using those behaviorist principles, observation, changing the environment, reinforcement, to change behavior that's considered socially significant.
Yeah.
It aims to be very scientific, very data-driven.
And the sources we looked at, they detail some really severe, lasting trauma reported by autistic adults who went through these programs, especially versions focused on verbal behavior. What did that scientific application actually look like for them?
The accounts are, frankly, harrowing. People describe endless, repetitive drills, being forced to make eye contact even when it felt physically painful, experiencing what felt like humiliation, like having your hands physically moved into position but being framed strictly as therapy, and every moment of not complying meticulously recorded on data sheets.
So their dignity was kind of tallied away, measured purely by compliance.
That's how many describe it. A focus on measurable output that completely overshadowed their internal experience or distress.
And when these individuals share these experiences of harm, what's the reaction from some institutions using these methods?
Often it's defensive. The sources mention these testimonies being dismissed as noise or anecdote, or labeled with jargon like non-functional expression.
Convenient if the pain doesn't fit on your spreadsheet.
It is convenient, because if it can't be measured by their tools within their framework, it effectively doesn't count as valid data.
Which loops back to that critique by the philosopher Tibor Machan he called behaviorism sophistry.
Yeah, he described it as a kind of hermetically sealed theology. It's immune to external critique or, crucially, falsification.
How so?
Because it defines reality only by what its own methods can measure. If your inner life, your pain, your unique way of processing isn't measurable by my behavioral checklist, then within the bounds of my science, it simply doesn't exist.
So Machan's saying the theory proves itself by forcing the world or the person to fit its tools.
Exactly. The proof comes from the controlled world it creates, not from engaging with a messy, unpredictable reality outside that controlled frame.
Okay, so this logic, this way of thinking, it didn't stay in the clinic or the lab. It became, as the sources put it, an empire of management.
That's right. The legacy of BFD isn't just in therapy. It's spread into management styles, policymaking, administration, HR departments, large bureaucracies.
So if ABA is the living church, clinically,
then management metrics are its policy empire. Think about the rituals. Compliance checks, fidelity checklists, data-driven improvement cycles.
the checklist as a prayer, the spreadsheet as a song.
Kind of, yeah. The language shifts. It's all optimization, efficiency, data points. The language of mercy or even just understanding complexity gets sidelined.
But what about the newer forms of ABA? You hear about gentle ABA or trauma-informed ABA. Aren't they moving away from that core control element?
Well, the critique presented in the sources often argues not really. They suggest that these newer versions tend to refine or codify the methods of control, making them maybe less obviously harsh, but without questioning the fundamental necessity of control itself.
So still operating within that same sealed system.
Often, yes. They maintain the insistence on being purely objective science, but the system, as Matan pointed out, struggles with falsifiability. It risks being orthodoxy, wearing a lab coat, rather than open scientific inquiry.
Which highlights this huge paradox, right? For behaviorism to become truly scientific by Popper standards, say.
It would need to be open to being proven wrong. It would need to build structures designed to collapse if new evidence demands it.
But that seems impossible within its current framework.
It's a massive challenge. Real scientific progress often involves dismantling old assumptions. Here, it would mean renouncing that core theology of control and genuinely inviting critique from the very people it historically dismissed: autistic adults, trauma experts, neurodiversity thinkers, co-authoring the inquiry.
But the system relies on controlling its own evidence, defining its own success.
Which makes that kind of radical openness seem, well, unreachable, as one source put it. The whole building relies on those controlled foundations.
Okay, let's shift gears. Let's talk about the counterpoint. The perspective that just inherently resists being broken down and quantified like this. We need to bring in the AuDHD Gestalt Language Processor concept, GLP.
Right. For listeners maybe not familiar, GLP describes a way of acquiring and using language, often seen in neurodivergent people, definitely including many autistic and AuDHD folks. It's very different from how Skinner saw language.
How did Skinner see it?
As sequences of small, controllable units, things like man's demands, tax labels. He broke it down to control it, essentially.
And the GLP perspective says?
It says language doesn't work like that, not fundamentally. For a Gestalt language processor, language arrives more like chords or gestalts.
Chords, like in music.
Exactly. Whole phrases, lines from movies, scripts, chunks that carry a whole lot of emotional weight, context, and resonance. It's not just about the literal meaning of each individual word in sequence.
So language as maybe poetry or a field of resonance, not just a code.
That's a great way to think about it. Recall, association, emotional tone. Those are primary. It's not a neat linear sequence you can easily control variable by variable.
So if Skinner dismissed inner life as irrelevant noise,
the GLP perspective flips that entirely. It says the inner life is the instrument. That noise the behaviorists try to filter out for clean data. That's life, that's communication, that's meaning-making.
Okay, this really lets us reclaim those two words Skinner tried to banish, freedom and dignity. How do we redefine them from this perspective, this resistance?
We can see them not as fuzzy sentiments, but as maybe relational and ontological necessities, real needs.
So freedom isn't about having some uncaused free will.
No, it's more about the lived capacity to orient yourself within your world, to choose between different meanings, different resonances, and crucially, the right to mean otherwise. The right to take your time, to hold on to ambiguity until coherence forms for you.
The right to hold time until coherence arrives. I like that. And dignity, if it's not getting a reward for good behavior.
Dignity becomes about inward coherence. That sense of yourself resonating truly, being in accord with its own pattern, even if that pattern doesn't fit external expectations or isn't easily measured.
And the danger in Skinner's approach is removing that subject, that inner coherence.
Yes. The moment you declare the inner life irrelevant, you erase accountability for harm caused to that inner life. Harm just becomes a systems error, a data point to be managed or optimized away. You can scale harm if you don't recognize the subject experiencing it.
And this whole conflict, the push for legibility versus the reality of human unpredictability and inner life, it's not just historical, it's playing out right now.
Absolutely. Think about AI development. There's this huge drive for efficiency, which often means smoothing out the data, flattening the outliers, what they sometimes call low probability tokens.
Which sounds exactly like dismissing non-functional expression.
It's the same impulse. When you optimize purely for prediction and efficiency, you inherently reduce the space for genuine novelty, for the unexpected insight, for, well, freedom in that GLP sense.
Or standardized testing in schools, or those behavioral nudges governments use.
All systems designed to guide behavior towards a predetermined correct outcome, often bypassing conscious engagement or diverse ways of thinking. They optimize for compliance and prediction. The GLP counterpoint reminds us that meaning, resonance, that inner coherence, that's the substance of freedom.
And when our institutions treat that meaning, that richness, as just inefficiency to be stamped out,
they're performing a kind of erasure. And they might even sanctify the harm caused by calling it scientific or data-driven.
So wrapping this deep dive up, thinking about Skinner's architecture of control and this vital resistance, what's the core takeaway?
I think it comes down to this. Reclaiming meaning is reclaiming freedom. And resisting that erasure, that push for predictability above all else, is reclaiming dignity.
A powerful connection.
Skinner wanted to abolish unpredictability. He saw it as a flaw. So for you listening, maybe consider this provocation. If we accept that real freedom involves, as we said, that right to hold time until coherence arrives, that capacity to mean otherwise, what systems in your own life, right now, at work, in education, the tech you use, are really optimized just for immediate prediction and compliance. What's the living noise, the unpredictable human element they're trying to filter out? Because the sources suggest that thing they can't quite measure or control. That messy, meaningful, unpredictable stuff, that's the very thing they fear most, meaning that refuses to be managed, that insists on being its own. It's back, and it won't be silenced.